"She's just a kid," someone whispered, their voice trembling. "And she saved his life." I didn't see it happen at first. All I remember is the screech of tires, the sickening crunch of metal, and then chaos. The crowd had gathered so quickly, forming a tight circle around the scene. It was a crosswalk near downtown. The light was red, but some guy in a truck had blown through it. He didn't even see the older man stepping into the street, until it was too late. People screamed, and then out of nowhere, this little girl darted into the road. She was maybe 8 or 9, thin as a twig, and her hair was braided neatly with little white beads that clicked together when she moved. She yanked the man by his coat sleeve, hard, just enough to pull him out of the truck's path. It was so close, the truck's mirror clipped her backpack. The driver slammed on the brakes after that, but it was too late to matter. The little girl had already saved him. The man she saved was bleeding from a scrape on his arm, but he was alive. Everyone started clapping and shouting, "Thank God." And, "That girl's a hero." She didn't smile or wave. She just stood there, quiet, looking up at him with these big, serious eyes. I watched as the man he looked familiar, like I'd seen him on TV or something, stared at her. He was in shock, I think. He kept asking, "Are you okay? Did you get hurt?" She shook her head, still silent. Her expression didn't change. Finally, someone in the crowd said, "That's Mr. Blake. He's one of the richest men in the country." I'd heard of him before. Billionaire tech guy. Always in the news for his flashy lifestyle. But at that moment, he didn't look rich or powerful. He just looked human. He knelt down in front of her, his voice shaky. "You saved my life. Do you understand that? You saved me." The girl nodded. Then, for the first time, she spoke. Her voice was soft but steady. "I know." The crowd chuckled at her confidence, but Mr. Blake's face stayed serious. "I owe you everything. Anything you want, anything at all. Just say it, and it's yours." Everyone leaned in closer, curious to hear what she'd ask for. $1 million? A car? A scholarship? I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't what she said next. "I want you to fix my school," she said simply. Mr. Blake blinked. "Your school?" She nodded again. "We don't have books, and the roof leaks when it rains. Our heater's broken, so we have to wear coats inside in winter. Can you fix it?" The crowd went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Mr. Blake looked stunned, like he didn't know what to say. After a long pause, he asked, "What's the name of your school?" "Carver Elementary," she said. "It's in the neighborhood over there." She pointed toward a part of town most people try to avoid. I felt a lump in my throat just thinking about the conditions she must have been describing. "I'll fix it," he said finally. His voice was hoarse, but there was a firmness in it. "I'll fix everything." The girl stared at him for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, thank you." She turned to leave, but Mr. Blake stopped her. "Wait, what's your name?" "Amara," she said. Then she walked away, her backpack swaying with each step. True to his word, Mr. Blake did more than just fix the school. Within months, Carver Elementary had a new roof, new books, new computers, everything it needed. He even funded programs for after-school tutoring and free meals. It became the kind of place every kid deserves, all because one little girl chose to ask for something bigger than herself. I still think about Amara sometimes. She didn't ask for fame or money, just help for her community. And the crazy part? She never showed up for the big event when they unveiled the changes to the school. I guess she didn't need to. She knew she'd done her part, and that was enough for her. To this day, whenever I walk past Carver Elementary, I smile. It reminds me that even the smallest voices can make the biggest differences. After the school was renovated, people from all over the city started paying attention to what happened at Carver Elementary. News crews came to do stories, and local leaders used it as an example of how much impact one person's generosity could have. They called it the Amara effect. But if you ask me, it wasn't just about Mr. Blake's money or the media buzz. It was about the way that little girl, Amara, had spoken up when it mattered most. She didn't have the kind of fear or hesitation most adults would have. She saw a chance to change something, and she took it. I kept thinking about her, wondering how someone so young could be so brave and selfless. I decided to ask around in her neighborhood. It wasn't easy to find her. She didn't hang around the school much after the renovation started, and she wasn't on social media like most kids. But eventually, I found her at a small park near an old apartment complex. She was sitting on a swing, reading a worn-out library book. I introduced myself and told her I'd been there the day she saved Mr. Blake. She didn't seem impressed. "I didn't do it for attention," she said, closing her book and looking at me with those same serious eyes. "I just wanted him to help." I told her that everyone was proud of her, and that her school was better now because of her. She shrugged. "It's not just about my school. There's lots of schools like Carver. They all need help." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. Here was a kid who had just inspired a billionaire to rebuild an entire school, and she still wasn't satisfied. Not because she was ungrateful, but because she saw the bigger picture. She wasn't thinking about herself, she was thinking about every kid who didn't have a fair chance. I asked her what she wanted to do when she grew up. She thought about it for a moment, then said, "I want to make things fair for everybody. Like, if you're rich, you don't get to have better stuff just because of money. Everyone should get the same good stuff." It was such a simple way to put it, but it made perfect sense. I couldn't help but smile. "You're going to do big things, Amara," I said. She just gave a small smile and opened her book again, like she didn't need to hear it. Over the years, I kept tabs on her. Amara grew up, went to high school, and eventually got a scholarship to a good college, one of those big-name universities that usually don't have a lot of kids from her side of town. But she didn't let that change her. She stayed focused on her goal, studying education and social work. By the time she graduated, she was already starting programs to support underfunded schools in the city. She worked with local leaders and businesses to funnel money into places that had been neglected for decades. And the craziest part? She did it all quietly, without any need for recognition. She never let it be about her. Mr. Blake stayed in touch with her too. He became one of her biggest supporters, donating to her initiatives and showing up to events she organized. He often said that Amara had taught him more about responsibility than anyone else in his life. "She didn't just save my life that day," he told reporters once. "She gave it meaning." Amara's story is one I tell people all the time now, especially when they feel like the world's problems are too big to fix. She taught me that real change doesn't start with $1 million, or a fancy plan. It starts with a voice, even a small one, saying, "This isn't right. Let's do better." And if a little girl could do all that, then maybe the rest of us can step up too. Years passed, and Amara's name began to carry weight in circles far beyond her city. What started as a simple request to fix her school became a movement to address inequality in education across the country. She launched an organization called Level Ground, focused on improving schools in underprivileged areas. It wasn't just about new books or better buildings. It was about creating opportunities that kids like her never had growing up. I remember watching her on TV during an interview. She sat across from a big-name journalist who asked her why she kept working so hard when she'd already accomplished so much. Her answer stuck with me. "It's not about fixing one school or one city," she said. "It's about making sure every kid has a fair chance no matter where they live or how much money their parents have. Until that happens, there's still work to do." That was Amara. She never saw her efforts as extraordinary, just necessary. Mr. Blake became one of her biggest allies, and their bond was something people often talked about. He once told a story at one of her fundraisers about the day she saved his life. He said, "When I offered her anything she wanted, I thought she'd ask for something for herself. But Amara? She was thinking about everyone else." That moment changed me. It made me realize how much I'd taken for granted. But Amara never let the spotlight stay on her for too long. She would redirect it, always bringing the focus back to the kids who needed help. And the crazy thing? She didn't let the wealth and resources around her change who she was. She still lived in the same modest neighborhood, even as her work took her to meetings with politicians, CEOs, and activists. One time I ran into her again, years after our first meeting at the park. She was back at Carver Elementary, walking through the hallways with a group of kids. The school looked incredible, bright murals on the walls, fully stocked classrooms, and happy kids everywhere. I stopped to say hello, and she remembered me right away. "Hey," she said, flashing a quick smile. "You're the guy who came to the park that day." "That's me," I said, grinning. "Looks like you've been busy." She laughed softly. "Yeah, I guess you could say that." We talked for a while, and I asked her if she ever got tired of fighting so hard for change. Her answer surprised me. "Sometimes," she admitted. "It's exhausting. But then I think about the kids who are sitting in classrooms like the one I was in. Kids who don't even know what's possible because no one's ever shown them. If I stop, who's going to fight for them?" Her words hit me just as hard as they did when she was 9 years old. Amara wasn't just fighting for change, she was leading it. Eventually, she did something that cemented her legacy forever. She pushed for and helped pass a nationwide initiative to fund public schools equally, regardless of the wealth of the surrounding neighborhoods. It was the kind of sweeping reform people had dreamed about for decades but never thought possible. Amara made it happen. I'll never forget the speech she gave the day it was signed into law. She stood on a stage in Washington, D.C., in front of a crowd of thousands. Cameras were flashing, and reporters were scribbling notes, but she didn't seem nervous. She spoke with the same calm confidence she had the day she asked Mr. Blake to fix her school. "This isn't the end," she said. "It's just the beginning. Because every child deserves a chance to dream, to grow, and to succeed. And it's up to all of us to make sure they get it." When she finished, the crowd erupted into applause. I stood there, clapping until my hands hurt, feeling lucky to have witnessed her journey from the very start. Amara proved that even the smallest actions, like asking for a school to be fixed, can ripple out and change the world. And she showed all of us that the real power lies not in what we have, but in what we're willing to give. As Amara's influence grew, so did the challenges. While her movement, Level Ground, garnered widespread support, it also faced opposition. Not everyone agreed with reallocating resources or changing the funding structures that had benefited wealthier areas for decades. There were heated debates in the media and pushback from politicians who saw her reforms as too radical. But Amara never backed down. She responded to criticism with facts, calm reasoning, and, most importantly, stories. She'd tell anyone who would listen about the kids she met, the ones who shared textbooks, who wore coats in freezing classrooms, who dreamed big dreams but were trapped by circumstances beyond their control. Once, during a particularly tense public hearing, a wealthy donor stood up and questioned her approach. "Do you really think taking money from successful districts to fix failing ones is fair?" he asked, his tone sharp. Amara didn't flinch. She stood tall and answered, "What's not fair is a child's future being decided by their zip code. This isn't about taking, it's about giving every child an equal shot at success." Her words went viral. Clips of her speech flooded social media, and people from all walks of life began rallying around her. Teachers shared stories of overcrowded classrooms, parents sent letters of gratitude, and students recorded videos saying how her efforts had changed their lives. One story, in particular, stuck with me. A boy from a rural town wrote to Amara, thanking her for the new science lab at his school. "I didn't think I could ever be a scientist," he wrote, "but now I know I can." She carried that letter with her everywhere. But Amara didn't just inspire others, she inspired Mr. Blake to take his involvement even further. He started a foundation dedicated to education reform, pledging millions to fund innovative programs. In interviews, he often credited Amara with changing his perspective. "She taught me that money is just a tool," he said during a televised event, "and it's only worth something if you use it to build a better future." Despite the challenges, Amara remained grounded. She still visited Carver Elementary regularly, sitting in classrooms and talking to kids. Whenever someone asked her how she stayed so connected, she'd say, "I started here. These kids are where I find my strength." One day, years after her initial rise to fame, I found myself back at Carver for a community event she was hosting. The schoolyard was packed with families, teachers, and students. There was laughter, music, and a sense of hope that felt almost tangible. As I stood there watching her talk to a group of kids, I realized something profound. Amara wasn't just a symbol of change. She was a reminder of what happens when someone refuses to accept the world as it is and decides to make it better. Later that day, I saw her standing near the swing set, the same one where I'd first met her years ago. I walked over and thanked her not just for what she'd done for the city, but for what she'd taught me. She smiled softly. "I didn't do it alone," she said. "No one ever does." Amara's journey didn't end there. She continued to fight for what she believed in, never losing sight of the little girl she once was, the one who ran into traffic to save a stranger, who asked for something bigger than herself, and who reminded us all that real power comes from compassion and courage. Every time I tell her story, I end it with this. Amara didn't just save a billionaire that day. She saved countless lives by inspiring the kind of change most people only dream about. And she showed the world what's possible when you believe that even the smallest voices can echo loud enough to change everything.